Dr. Dominic Pemberton took the last sip of his smoothie and set the glass down with a quiet, anticipatory sigh. For the first time in months, there was a flicker of excitement in his usually cautious eyes. Bingham and Blaine Pharmaceuticals had called early that morning to confirm his appointment as Director of Patient Narrative Strategy. They wanted him to start immediately. It was the kind of title corporations invented when they wanted something delicate to be handled without leaving fingerprints. Dominic had concerns. Not suspicions exactly, but enough experience to know that companies did not create roles like this unless there was something to contain, soften, or make less visible. During the interview, they had referred to unfavorable patient feedback regarding one of their leading products. Dominic knew what that meant. Complaints. Many of them. Enough, perhaps, for regulators to begin asking questions. Enough for Bingham and Blaine to be nervous. The drug was called Nervexidone. By 10 o'clock that morning, Dominic was seated in his new office on the 32nd floor of Bingham and Blaine's London headquarters. Everything about the room spoke of money, carefully disguised as taste. Walnut paneling, thick cream carpet, original art on the walls, and a long window overlooking the city, as though the company owned not only the building but the skyline beyond it. A few minutes later, Mrs. Bellamy, his newly assigned secretary, swept in with a silver tray. On it sat a porcelain coffee pot, 2 hand-glazed cups with matching saucers, tiny linen napkins, polished silver spoons, and a crystal dish of buttery mint sweets. At the end of each day, she told him cheerfully, noticing his glance at the sweets, if no one has eaten them, I take them home for my daughter. Millie says they're the best sweets in the world. Dominic smiled despite himself. I'll be sure to leave some for Millie. Mrs. Bellamy beamed as though he had just passed some private test of character. Mr. Norris will be with you shortly, Dr. Pemberton, she said, placing the tray on the low table as though she was starring in her own private episode of Downton Abbey. Michael Norris arrived without knocking. He was tall, silver-haired, and beautifully dressed, with the untroubled air of a man who had spent decades turning serious things into manageable things. He poured himself coffee before Dominic could rise, then placed a thick file on the table between them. This, he said, tapping the cover, is the reason you're here. Dominic opened the file. Inside was a list of organizations, support groups, charities, campaigners, researchers, social media pages, review sites, interview links, webinar archives, and names. So many names. Michael leaned back in his chair. We need a full assessment, who they are, what they're saying, where their influence is coming from. Events, interviews, websites, group posts, patient stories, videos, book reviews, media connections, professional alliances, pressure points, everything. Dominic looked up. Pressure points? Michael smiled faintly. Anything that affects credibility, emotional instability, professional complaints, financial irregularities, family disputes, exaggerated claims, inconsistencies. You know how this works. Dominic did know. After leaving medical practice earlier than planned, he had built a new career on knowing exactly how these things worked. Calmly, he turned back to the file and began scanning the list. Lobbying groups, non-profits, support communities, medical commentators, former patients. Then he saw her name. Dr. Kara Minelli. Dominic paused. Kara Minelli was not the kind of woman one easily forgot. Those who knew her described her as warm, quirky, fearless, and occasionally scatty in the most endearing way. She could misplace her keys, forget what day of the month it was, and then calmly and confidently stand before a room of medical professionals and say the thing no one else dared to say. There was an unusual steadiness about her. Nothing seemed to impress her very much. She was not interested in titles, not money, not social status, not polished authority. She had grown up around influence, the daughter of a prominent diplomat father and a phenomenal mother. Yet she remained remarkably down to earth. Kara loved people. That was the first thing most people noticed. The second was that beneath her softness was a backbone made of titanium. She was as solid as rock, with a rare kind of inner seeing, the ability to notice what others missed and sense what remained unspoken. Years earlier, she had been prescribed Navexidone for seizures. A child's dose, her doctor had reassured her. Nothing to worry about. But there had been something to worry about. Kara had survived the medication, the withdrawal, and the disbelief that followed. Then, almost by accident, she had written a book about her experience. What began as one woman's attempt to make sense of what had happened became an international bestseller with thousands of reviews from readers who said, in one way or another, "This happened to me too." Kara was not loud, but she was impossible to ignore. Dominic leaned back in his chair and looked out across the city. He had a difficult task ahead of him and very little time in which to do it. But he was not easily daunted. He was Oxford educated, sharp-minded, and impeccably calm under pressure. Over the more recent years, he had earned millions, helping major corporations survive reputational storms. This, he told himself, would be no different. "Right," Dominic said, closing the file with quiet confidence. "Give me a few days. By Friday, my preliminary report will be ready." Michael Norris smiled. "Excellent. That is exactly what we hope to hear." Dominic watched him leave, then looked down again at the name printed neatly on the page. Dr. Kara Minelli? For reasons he could not yet explain, he did not turn the page straight away. Dominic began, as he always did, with distance. Distance was useful. It allowed him to read pain as data, fear as tone, outrage as reputational risk, and to separate human distress into categories: regulatory exposure, media vulnerability, activist influence, brand threat. By midday, the distance had begun to fail him. The first account was from a retired teacher in Manchester who had been prescribed Navexidone after a bereavement and not sleeping well. Whenever she tried to stop, she developed burning skin, neurological pain, shaking, terror on waking, and a sense that her own mind had turned against her. Her doctor told her it was anxiety. Her family believed him. The second was from a young father in Toronto who had gone from running a large corporation to lying in the basement of his parents' home in a darkened room, unable to tolerate sound, light conversation, or the laughter of his children. The third was from a woman in Melbourne who had been given 3 additional medications to treat what no one recognized as withdrawal. By the time she found Kara Minelli's book, she had begun to wonder whether she was losing her mind. Dominic read until the words blurred. These were not isolated complaints. No one could say they were coordinated hysteria or the work of activists looking for attention. These were not random people conspiring to sue drug manufacturers. They were patients with patterns. The same symptoms, the same disbelief, the same desperate search for someone, anyone, to say, "This is real, you are not imagining it." By late afternoon, Dominic had moved from public reviews to adverse event reports, from medical forums to patient interviews, from regulatory submissions to quiet corners of the internet where people wrote with a rawness no public relations team could manufacture. A grandmother who could no longer tolerate the sound of her grandchildren's voices. A student who had withdrawn from university after being told her symptoms were psychological. A musician who could no longer bear music. A nurse who recognized the pattern in her patients only after it happened to her. All suffering terribly, with debilitating physical and psychological symptoms. Dominic closed the file and pressed his fingers to his eyes. For the first time in his career, he wondered whether the story he had been hired to manage was not a story at all. It was evidence. He called Michael Norris just after 6. Michael answered on the second ring. "Tell me you have something useful." "I do," Dominic said. "Good, but not what you want." There was a pause. Dominic turned in his chair and looked out at the city, now dimming under the dusky evening sky. "The complaints are credible, Michael. The reviews are consistent. The adverse event reports are not random. There is a pattern here, and it is stronger than I expected." Michael was silent for a moment too long. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying there appears to be a serious problem with naltrexone. Tolerance dependence, severe withdrawal reactions, misdiagnosis, additional prescribing, functional collapse, your representatives, misleading doctors. It is not looking good. People are devastated." Michael exhaled sharply. "That is not helpful." "It is true. Truth is only useful when it can be managed." Dominic's jaw tightened. "I need the summary of product characteristics, the current patient information leaflet, any internal safety reviews, the MedGuard adverse event data, and all recent pharmacovigilance reports related to naltrexone." "You don't need all of that." "Yes, I do. You were not brought in to conduct a moral inquiry." "No," Dominic said evenly. "I was brought in to assess the patient narrative. That is what I am doing." Michael gave a low, humorless laugh. "Dominic, naltrexone is one of our best-selling products. It is prescribed internationally. We cannot have a collection of frightened people on the internet destabilizing public confidence. These people are not merely frightened. Everyone is frightened when they read enough online. That is not what I am seeing." "Then look harder." Michael's voice cooled. "Find the inconsistencies, find the exaggerations. Find the ones with psychiatric histories, family disputes, failed businesses, previous complaints, anything that affects credibility, especially Minelli." Dominic looked down at the open page before him. Kara's name appeared again, underlined in red by someone in the company. "Why, especially her. Because she is the problem. She wrote a book. She built a platform. She documented patient experience. She gave it language, Michael snapped. That is far more dangerous. The next morning, Michael arrived at Dominic's office, carrying another file. He did not sit down. This woman, Minelli, he said, placing the file on Dominic's desk. She is trouble. Dominic looked at him carefully. Trouble or credible? Michael ignored the question. She presents herself as harmless. Warm voice, gentle manner, all that benevolent nonsense. But she is very dangerous. She doesn't need to shout. That is the problem. She shows instead of tells. Those book reviews alone are a nightmare. Thousands of people repeating the same story in their own words. You can't dismiss that easily. No, Dominic said. You can't. Michael's eyes narrowed. I have brought you something. Dominic did not reach for the file. What is it? Recordings. Of what? Her support calls. Dominic went very still. How did you get them? Michael smiled, as if the question amused him. Does it matter? Yes. It matters only if you plan to ask questions that are not useful. Dominic pushed the file back across the desk. I am not listening to unlawfully obtained recordings. Michael's face hardened. Don't be naive. You know how this level of work is done. I know how some people do it. You were hired because you are not sentimental. I was hired because I am good. Then be good, Michael said sharply. Find something. The room fell quiet. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Michael straightened his cuffs, his voice returning to its usual polish. She has a nice voice, by the way. You'll hear that for yourself. Dominic said nothing. After Michael left, the file remained on the desk between Dominic and the city beyond the glass. He told himself he would not touch it. He told himself there was a line, and that the line mattered. For most of the afternoon he did not open it. Then, shortly before dusk, curiosity won. Or perhaps curiosity was too small a word for it. He opened the file, selected one recording, and pressed play. At first, there was only a faint rustle, then a woman's broken breathing. Someone was crying quietly, trying not to make too much sound. I don't know how much longer I can do this, the caller whispered. Then Kara's voice entered the room. Not dramatic, not polished, not persuasive in the way media-trained voices were persuasive. Warmer than that, human, gentle, steady. You only have to make it through today, this moment, this hour, one breath at a time, Kara said softly. You do not have to survive the whole future tonight. Cross the bridges one by one as you get to them. Don't lose heart. You can do it. You have been doing it. The strength comes. Dominic sat very still. The caller cried harder. Kara did not rush to fill the silence. She stayed with her, offering reassurance in small, careful sentences, never promising what she could not promise, never dismissing the agony, never turning the woman's fear into weakness. It is normal to feel overwhelmed. Look at what you are facing, Kara said. Your system is overwhelmed, and you are frightened, because this is frightening. But over the years I have watched those who felt as unwell as you are feeling now go on to heal. The human body is remarkably resilient and self-healing. It will not stop working on re-establishing homeostatic equilibrium. Keep holding on. Dominic listened until the call ended. Then he listened to another, and another. He heard Kara console a man who had lost his work and feared he would never heal. He heard her gently encourage a mother to seek medical advice for new physical symptoms, while also reminding her that withdrawal could make ordinary sensations feel terrifying. He heard her sing 2 lines of an old lullaby to an elderly woman who could not stop shaking. He heard her offer a reduced fee to someone who was struggling financially. He listened to people burst into tears before even speaking, and hearing the hope in their voices later when hanging up. By the time Dominic removed his headphones, the office was dark, except for the city lights and the glow of his laptop. He did not listen to the rest of the recordings Michael had given him. He told himself it was because they were unlawfully obtained, because they crossed a line even Bingham and Blaine should have known not to cross. But that was not the whole truth. The truth was that Kara Minelli's voice had unsettled him. Not because it was a threat, or because she was a good therapist. Not because she did her job remarkably well, because her voice was kind. And Dominic Pemberton, who had spent years in rooms where kindness was treated as weakness, found himself wanting to hear it again. That evening, alone in his apartment, he opened his laptop and searched for Kara's website. It was not difficult to find. Kara Minelli had built a quiet sanctuary online, meditations, reflections, recovery stories, simple words of encouragement for people trying to survive days most others could not imagine. Dominic stared at the membership page for a long moment. Then, with a strange mixture of guilt and longing, he entered his details and joined properly. He chose to not know more about her through surveillance, or a leaked recording, or a file handed to him by Michael Norris. He chose to go to her and to listen. He clicked on a meditation called Resting in the Safe Place Within. Her voice filled the room. Dominic closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he did not feel as though he had to solve, manage, contain, or control anything. He simply listened. Over the next few nights, Dominic listened again. At first, he told himself it was research. He was studying tone, influence, audience engagement. He was observing how she built trust, and appalled by the third night, even he no longer believed that. He listened because her voice quieted something in him he had not realized was tired. And he listened because after years of boardrooms and polished lies, there was something almost startling about sincerity. He listened because Kara spoke to the frightened and the weary as though they were not weak, broken, or inconvenient. And somewhere in the privacy of his own carefully ordered life, Dominic Pemberton began to understand why thousands of people trusted her. The more he listened, the easier it felt to trust her. As he lay his head on his pillow that night, drifting off to her dulcet tones, he realized that he too was beginning to trust this woman he had never met.